So welcome to this Accounting for Nature hosted webinar on the five-step process. Today, we're going to cover the steps associated with creating an environmental account and maintaining a certified environmental account with Accounting for Nature. Before we dive into the content, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country that I'm dialing in from today, which are the Jagera and the Turrbal people. And I wanted to send my respect to elders emerging and present and past, and wanted to acknowledge and send my respect to any traditional custodians joining us today and any Torres Strait Islander people. So this session is recorded and it will be posted on our website. So in case you miss any component of the webinar, please jump onto our website or to our YouTube channel next week, and you'll be able to find the recording there. I'm quickly going to introduce myself before we dive into the actual content of today's session. So my name is Amanda. I'm the Advisory and Capacity Building Manager of Accounting for Nature, and I've been with Accounting for Nature for the past 4 years. So my background is broadly in environmental sciences, and at Accounting for Nature, I help people understand and navigate the Accounting for Nature framework, both those who are currently using our framework, but also help people who are seeking out to see if we are a good fit for their needs and the purpose that they're seeking environmental reporting for. So we're going to start the webinar with an introduction of the Accounting for Nature framework. We are then going to dive into what an environmental account is. We're going to cover that very briefly before going into the details of the five-step process. And towards the end of the webinar, I'm going to talk about further training opportunities for those who want to learn more. This session has been allocated about an hour, but there will be time towards the end to answer any questions you have. So if, as we go through the session, you do have any questions, please put them into the Q&A chat box, and I will get to that to the end. If we run out of time, or if there's any questions that are really complex and need more detailed considerations, we'll get back to you on those questions through email. So the Accounting for Nature framework was developed through over 15 years of research from the Wentworth group of concerned scientists. They worked with landholders and NRM organisations across Australia to develop a standard that was flexible in how it could be applied, to make sure it was applicable across different ecosystems and across different scales, but that provided a standardization for the way that we report and communicate about the environmental condition. So about 5 years ago, their research was turned into the non-for-profit organisation of Accounting for Nature. And we really provide the standard for how to measure and report on the state of nature in a scientifically credible way that provides the transparency and integrity that is needed in this space. The framework is really designed to support other overarching goals, standards, targets, and reporting standards. So what a lot of these do really well is providing the overarching instructions on what is important to be reporting on and what targets do we, as countries and as companies, what we should strive towards. But a lot of them don't provide the detailed instructions on how to exactly generate the data to support these. So Accounting for Nature comes in through providing really specific instructions on how to collect data on the ground and how to report on that data in a standardized manner. And that can then be fed into a lot of these other global targets and frameworks that are out there. And what Accounting for Nature does in addition is providing independent third-party verification of that data, meaning there's extra trust and rigor behind environmental reporting. If you're interested to learn more about how Accounting for Nature fits into some of these global targets and goals and programs, you can go to our website because we do have a whole document covering on how we can feed into to reporting on a lot of these other goals and standards that are out there. And at the core of what we do is providing integrity to green claims behind environmental markets and make sure that we have the data we need to effectively manage our resources. So we provide transparency to environmental reporting by making sure that all claims that are being put out to markets have data that's publicly available to access to help support and underpin those claims. We also provide independence through the third-party audit and verification of environmental accounts. And we provide comparability through a metric called the econ, which I'll talk more about shortly. We are also working really hard to make sure we're as user-friendly as we possibly can be, noting that environmental reporting can be a really complex space. So we're investing in technology solutions to help streamline the process, and we spend a lot of time in education to help make sure people understand how to apply the Accounting for Nature framework. And last but not least, we also prioritize scientific rigor. So all methods that can be applied in the Accounting for Nature framework has gone through a standardized process where they're independently reviewed by a scientist. And I apologize if you heard any of that. That is my dog barking at the mailman. So the core three things we work on is certifying environmental accounts that have been built in accordance to our standard. And an environmental account, in its essence, is a reporting tool for how to publish and communicate data that's been collected on the state of nature. We also accredit scientific methods. So we at Accounting for Nature don't develop our own methods. They're developed by third parties, and they go through a standardized process and an independent review by scientists before they're accredited. And lastly, we build capacity in the scientific community to help apply accredited methods. So because we're a certification standard, that means that we can't go out and build environmental accounts ourselves, because that's a conflict of interest when it comes to certification. What we do instead is training professionals who are working in the environmental sectors on how to apply the Accounting for Nature framework to make sure we have a community of practice. So since we started as a non-for-profit in 2019, we have seen 61 environmental accounts registered, and these are available for anyone to view on the Accounting for Nature website. 22 of these environmental accounts have been certified. That means they have gone through all of the 5 steps that we're going to cover today and have collected data and have environmental monitoring data reported. We have accredited 23 different methods, and we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about what a method is and how you go about selecting a method. And lastly, we have about 100 accredited experts and auditors. And towards the end, we're going to talk more in detail about what these are. But in essence, they're that community of practice who can help people or organizations set up environmental accounts or audit environmental accounts. So I wanted to introduce the concept of the econ early on because it's really at the core of the Accounting for Nature framework. The econ is an index that stands for the Environmental Condition Index, and it describes the state of an environmental asset from a score from 0 to 100. So 100 represents the best possible state an environmental asset can be in, and 0 means that the environmental asset is fully degraded or it might be missing. And so the econ is calculated based on reference benchmarks. And a reference benchmark tells us what the particular environmental asset should look like if it hadn't been degraded or if it's restored to the best possible state it can get to. And the econ is then calculated against that reference benchmark to tell us how close are we to that best possible state for the particular asset. And I wanted to flag the slight difference between environmental condition accounting and natural capital accounting. So environmental condition accounting is the focus of the Accounting for Nature framework, and it's really looking at the ecological condition or the state of nature, and it's focused on tracking change in that state of nature over time. Now, natural capital accounting, on the other hand, takes environmental condition data as one of the parameters that goes into estimating the stocks and the flows of natural resources and the financial value that those resources bring. So environmental condition accounting is really one of the pillars behind natural capital accounting. And so that is why you won't see the Accounting for Nature framework put any direct dollar values on environmental assets. The core focus of what we do is making sure the condition of environmental assets is clearly understood and communicated. I wanted to introduce this little pyramid of an environmental account. And this is the final slide before we do that deep dive into the 5-step process. And I'm going to start from the bottom of the pyramid where we have scope and purpose. So underpinning each environmental account is a very well thought through approach on what is important for our organization or our particular project area or site to be measuring and reporting on. Once we have a really clear idea of what that is, we then go and look at accredited methods to understand which methods should I be applying to generate the data that I need for my environmental reporting. Every time you apply an accredited method, you create what is called an asset account. So if you apply one method for vegetation and one method for soil condition, you will generate 2 separate asset accounts, one for vegetation and one for soil. Each of these asset accounts will have its own econ score to communicate the condition of that particular asset. And the environmental account is really the umbrella term that captures all of these. So an environmental account can include one or multiple asset accounts, depending on how many methods were applied as a part of the environmental account. Now we're going to dive into the 5-step process, which is really the stages that you go through when you are designing an environmental account. So the first step that we're going to talk about is the design stage. That's when you decide on all the important parameters of what you are going to do to execute your environmental account. Once you have those in place, you come to us to register your environmental account. Now, registration is really important because it acts as a checkpoint. So we make sure that the methods you've selected are appropriate for the purpose of your environmental account and that your field data collection plan has been designed in accordance to that method you selected. We then give you the go-ahead to go out and collect your field data and generate that econ as a part of step 3, which is build. Once you have collected all the data, you have written all documents required, it's time to submit the account for certification. And once you have a certified environmental account, there's a few easy steps you need to take to maintain it. And then we require that you go out and recollect data and certify your environmental account at least every 5 years. So you can do it more frequently if you want to. Some purposes might also require you to do this more often, but at a minimum, we require you to retake step 3 and 4 every 5 years. So the first thing that you really need to consider in designing an environmental account is the purpose. And as a part of that, you need to identify the audience of who is going to use this environmental account and what type of decisions will the account help to inform. Now, those decisions can be internal management decisions, but it could also be looking at if you're seeking investment. So what would my stakeholders need to know to make those investment decisions? Am I talking to my bank or other financial institutions? Am I seeking to access any particular environmental markets like co-benefit markets or biodiversity credit markets? And what data does those markets require? It's also really important here to think about the potential claims you want to make. So, is there any particular statement you want to be able to put up to the public, to your board, etc.? Because that will inform what you need to measure on the ground to be able to support that particular claim. The next step is taking that purpose to identify the environmental assets that you need to measure. So you really need to keep in mind the audience and what information needs to be included in an environmental account when selecting your environmental asset. Now we break down the environment in a few different steps to generate environmental assets. So first we have the overarching three categories of land, freshwater, and ocean. Breaking those down into its separate segments, we have what we call asset classes, where we have fauna, vegetation, soil sediment, microorganisms, ecosystems, and water. Now, asset classes can be broken down further. So if we're looking at fauna, we can have an environmental asset, which is a particular species. We do, for example, have a koala method. Or we can look at a group of species. So we have a woodland bird method. Or we can look really broadly, and for that we have a mammal method and an aquatic eDNA method. So it really comes down to understanding specifically what you need to measure and report, and based on your purpose, what particular asset is most suitable for your environmental account. Now, some methods are quite broad, which is really common when you come to vegetation or soil, meaning that methods are designed to be applicable to any type of ecosystem within a particular geographic region. And sometimes that geographical region can be really broad, such as all of Australia. Sometimes it can be a bit more narrow, so only applicable to rainforests. The next step in the journey is identifying the scope. And there's a fair few parameters associated with the scope. Firstly, you have the accuracy level. So accredited methods are given an accuracy of 80, 90, or 95%. And it's describing the confidence that we have in an econ score that the method generates. So the higher the accuracy, the more confidence we have in that the econ score is a true reflection of the actual condition on the ground. Now, higher accuracy methods can sometimes be more complex and costly to implement. They might require you to collect more indicators or establish more sample sites. But some purposes, such as generating credits, might require you to have a higher accuracy level. In general, we say if your sole purpose is informed decision-making when it comes to management of a property or a project area, a lower accuracy level, such as 80%, is often more than sufficient for that. You also need to consider the boundary of the asset accounts. So you could either apply all of the selected methods, if you have multiple, across the whole environmental account boundary. But there are instances where you might want to measure vegetation in one part of your property and you might want to measure soil somewhere else. It could be that as a cropping enterprise, you want to understand the soil condition, where the productive activities are happening, but you also have a separate area for revegetation where you want to understand how that vegetation condition is tracking. So you can apply different methods to different areas depending on your purpose. You also need to consider the reporting period. So that is when and how often you are going to be collecting field data. Some methods provide really specific instructions and tell you that you need to sample within a particular season. This might be to identify the time period where fauna is most active in your area, or it might be that you need to have flowering grasses to help identify different grass species. So look at the method to see if it has any particular requirements when it comes to reporting periods, and then also consider your available resources to implement the method to determine the time periods. The next thing to consider is if you want to attribute change to management activities. So if you want to make the claim and say that we have improved the vegetation in this restoration site by X amount because of the actions or activities that we undertook, you also then need to identify areas where these activities didn't take place so that you can compare the actual outcomes from a change in management practices. And we do have a whole guidance on how to establish sites for attribution if this is something you want to do. And lastly, you need to consider if you want to include something that's called the PCOND. So the PCOND stands for the Productive Condition Index. It's similar to the ECOND in that it generates a score between 0 and 100. But instead of considering the environmental condition of the asset, it looks at the productive capacity. So for grazing, that might be looking at the productive capacity of your pasture by looking at the palatable species. For cropping, that might be looking at the soil chemistry from the perspective of what is optimal soil chemistry for the soil type I'm in and for what I'm producing. So the PCOND is an optional metric that is available for some of our methods. We have materiality assessment guidelines that can help you go through the design stage in a more structured approach. So they go through step by step the different things that you need to map and identify to create an environmental account that fits your purpose. Going through a materiality assessment is often a really good idea if your operation is more complex and your purpose isn't as clear to you. And we do offer assistance through materiality workshops. So if you're interested, we can set up a workshop specifically for your organization to go through that structured decision-making process together with you. So once you have an idea of your design parameters, it's time to identify if a suitable method is available for your purpose. So we currently have 23 methods available, and they're all listed on our website. And each method is designed for a particular purpose, a particular environmental asset. They all have those accuracy levels associated with them, so 80, 90, or 95%. And they're all designed for different scales. So we have methods that are applicable at the local scale, which is what we call a project or property size, or at the regional scale, which is more so when we're looking at NRM regions and larger government areas. And some methods also have geographical constrictions to them. So are they applicable Australia-wide, or can they only be used in a particular state or a particular ecosystem? If an accredited method isn't available that meets your need and fits your purpose, you do have an option of developing a new method. So we have an online training module in method development that goes through the process and the steps associated with developing a new method. So most methods are developed either by organizations, but often in collaboration with various research institutes. And the overarching steps of method development is firstly sending us a notification of the intent to develop a new method. And at that stage, we make sure that there isn't already an existing method available in our method catalog that is too similar to the method you're proposing. Once we've had that initial consultation with you, you go away, you develop the method, and it's then sent to us for a technical review, which is where we go through the method and checking that against the standard criteria that we have for accredited methods. Once we make sure a method meets the criteria in our standard, it goes to the independent science committee for a review. Once approved through the independent science committee, the method is then finalized and accredited. And if you want to learn more about developing a method, you can contact us at training@accountingfornature.org, and we can enroll you into the method development module. And so towards the end of step one, when you have developed or selected an accredited method suitable to your purpose, you need to look at how that method tells you to go about account stratification. And what account stratification really entails is identifying areas of the environmental account that are similar in condition and asset type. So the first thing you need to look at is generating something called sub-assets. Every method will have a slightly different approach to delineating sub-assets, but for a vegetation method, it's often mapping out the different vegetation types that you have in your area. For a soil method, that can be looking at the different soil types or soil orders. If you're looking at mammals, it can be identifying different habitat types. Once you have broken down the environmental asset into smaller components, you need to consider the overall condition state of the asset account area. Very often, that state is influenced by land use. So you might have different parts of the area that's dedicated for different purposes, such as an area meant for grazing and another area meant for revegetation or restoration. So whatever it is that influences the broad condition of the area, you need to break down into its own separate components. To generate assessment units, we intersect or overlay these two maps. So you need to consider both the land use or the condition state of the asset, as well as the breakdown of the different types of the asset within the account boundary. So for example, you might have eucalypt forest and grazing and a separate one for eucalypt forest and restoration. So that means you would have two assessment units. And it's the assessment units that tell you how many samples you will need to take, and the method will then guide you to how to establish those sample sites within each assessment unit. You also need to consider how to identify the reference benchmarks. So most of our methods include links to databases or resources to help you identify a reference benchmark, but there is differences across Australia about the availability and accessibility of benchmark data, both depending on the environmental asset at hand, but also your specific geographic location. We have guidance in our method rules on how to identify reference benchmarks and the hierarchy, but in general, we always recommend firstly assessing any publicly available sources or databases and start by looking through the links available in that method. If you don't have any published sources for your benchmarks, you can look at establishing reference sites. And these need to be as close to undegraded state of that particular asset as possible. And you would use the sample site results as your reference benchmark. So if you're looking to measure vegetation within your account area, you're close to a state forest, national park, or you have a part on your property that's really intact, you could set up reference sites within those areas to inform your reference benchmark. For some environmental assets, it's really common to use models, and this is particularly the case when looking at fauna and water. So there might be model data on benchmarks that you can utilize. And last, if none of the other options are available, you can use expert opinion. You just need to make sure that that expert is suitably qualified to give that opinion and have that expert publicly named in the report once it's published. Ideally, we also want to see expert opinion data being verified by another expert in the field if possible. So once you have designed your environmental account, it's time to register. And as I mentioned, the registration stage is a really important checkpoint where we check that your sampling plan is correct before you go out and actually collect the data. It does happen that people jump straight to step 3, which is the field data collection. And we hate when we have to go back to people and tell them that they've either undersampled or oversampled. And particularly undersampling can be really difficult for methods that require you to collect data in a particular season. So you might have missed the opportunity to collect all the data when you were out in the field. So once you register, you end up in our environmental account registry on our website. you get your own little environmental account page where you would talk about the environmental assets that you're intending to measure and the purpose of your environmental account. There are options to have a private environmental account, and that means it does not become publicly listed on our website. It comes with a few restrictions. So the environmental account holder isn't authorized to talk about the environmental account. So unless it's publicly available, you can't make any public claims where you say you have an environmental account with us. And you cannot make any claims about the outcomes or the results of your environmental account, except for internal or peer-to-peer confidential purposes. So you could use the data to share with your board members, or you could use the data to share directly with your financial institution. And if you decide to register a private environmental account, you can change that and make it public at any stage. Once the account is registered, it's time to go out and build the environmental account. So this is where you collect the data in the field. And each method will tell you what indicators to collect and how to collect these. Some methods that are more complex to implement will also require that you bring in a subject specialist. So if you pick a vegetation method with a higher level of accuracy, that method might tell you that you need to have an ecologist to go out and collect that particular field data. It all comes down to the specialist skills that are needed to implement a specific method. Once you have collected your field data, it's time to calculate the indicator condition scores. Now, the indicator condition score is similar to the econ in that it's also on a scale from 0 to 100, but it's a score given to each and every indicator that you collected in each assessment unit. And it's all based again on the difference between the reference benchmark data for that particular indicator score. So if you would be looking at vegetation and you're in a particular forest type, the reference benchmark data will tell you the expected height of trees in that ecosystem. And you will then take your field measure, compare that to the reference benchmark to calculate your indicator condition score. The indicator condition score formulas can be quite complex and long, but they're all included in the method, and we often have workbooks available in Excel spreadsheets that can help you with these calculations. We're also developing an online environmental accounting tool, which will help you automatically calculate the indicator condition scores and the econt by putting in your measured value, your reference benchmark value, and the behind the scene of the software will calculate the indicator condition score and the econ score for you. So this is what our current spreadsheets can look like. So what you see in this example is a native vegetation method. And to refresh your memory, the sub-asset that we mentioned earlier is that breaking down the asset based on its specific components or types. So for vegetation, we're looking at different ecosystem types. And in this particular method, it's using the Queensland ecosystem types. They're called regional ecosystem, and they all come with this little number afterwards. The assessment unit is then generated by looking at the combination of ecosystem type and land use. So in this example here, we have the green ecosystem 11.5.1, and on top of that, we have two different land uses, so grazing and protected woodland. Next to that, you see all the indicators associated with this particular method. You then have your reference benchmark measure, which is always dependent on the regional ecosystem and not on the land use. So because it represents the intact or undegraded state of an ecosystem, that benchmark will be the same regardless of the land use taking place inside of that ecosystem. You would then add your average measure, and that calculates the indicator condition score for you. So some of the indicator condition scores can be really simple. So it's a simple percentage, but more often there's a lot more complex formulas that go into these. Once you've calculated your indicator condition score, you will calculate the econ both for your assessment unit and for your sub-asset before you generate an econ for your whole asset account. And what that means is that you first look at the combination of land use and vegetation type and calculate the econ for that particular combination. You then combine all land uses within one type of vegetation to generate an econ for the vegetation community. Lastly, you calculate the asset econ by looking at the econ given to each of your different ecosystems. And it's always area weighted, meaning that the size of a particular ecosystem or land use heavily influences the importance that score will have in generating the econ for the whole asset account. The next step after calculating the econ is to write your technical report. So in the technical report, we include information such as the purpose and the context and the scope of the account. So all of those aspects that we covered in step 1, design. We then describe the process of applying the particular method. We summarize the outcomes. So how did we calculate the econ and what is the econ? And then we need to acknowledge any limitations. And that could be you had a flood, there was one sample site you couldn't access, or for some reason you had to collect one of the samples at a later time in year, etc. And so each method generates its own asset account, and each asset account has its own technical report. So if you measure the condition of 3 different environmental assets, you would have 3 different technical reports. And we have templates available for these technical reports that you can access to help guide you through what information needs to be included in each stage. Once you have written your technical report, it's time to submit the environmental account for certification. We have 2 different certification pathways. We have AFN verified, which is where we at Accounting for Nature does a technical assessment of the environmental account. And then we have independent audit, where the account goes to an independent auditor for review. And there's a couple of reasons for why you might need to have an independent audit of your environmental account. And so one of them is if you're looking to issue any credits. So that could be co-benefits to carbon credits, or it can be standalone biodiversity credits. If you are seeking any sustainability-linked loans, that often requires an independent audit, as well as if the account is to underpin any green bonds. Any claims about any type of contribution to nature positive goals needs to be independently audited. And if you're seeking to utilize product labeling, you must first talk to us about the type and the design of product labeling to see if that environmental account also needs to be independently audited. Once your environmental account has been successfully certified, it will end up in our certification registry. So very similar to our registered environmental account registry, we have a separate one for all environmental accounts that have been certified. And what we do here is expand on the environmental account page, so including those technical reports, as well as something we call a certification passport, which provides a quick overview of the environmental account and is a really good resource to share with anyone who wants to learn more about the environmental account without going into the technical nitty-gritty details that are included in the technical report. Once you have a certified environmental account, there's an annual process in maintaining that environmental account that includes filling out and submitting an annual certification compliance report, which is also called an ACCR. And that means that every year we're going to ask you if there's been any material changes to the environmental account area. So have there been any natural disasters through the environmental account area that's influenced the condition? Have you changed management practices that might influence the econ? So anything like that needs to be disclosed. And if there are any impacts to the environmental condition, um, those become published on the environmental account registry so that people can go in and understand if we expect the econ to be different next time you go about your certification process. We have a public fees schedule that's available on our website. And so through this environmental account process, we charge fee at 3 different stages. So the first stage is step 2, when you come to register your environmental account. We do charge a registration fee. Some of our methods do have a license fee. Now, it's not a lot of methods that have this fee, but some method authors do put a license fee on a method to recover some of the cost associated with method development. And that license fee is always charged and negotiated directly between the person who's seeking to use the method and the method author. When you come to step 4, which is submit, we do charge a certification fee if you go through the technical assessment pathway, which is where you will have an AFN verified environmental account. And then we charge an annual fee at step 5 for maintenance. So if you haven't yet certified your environmental account, we will charge you an annual registration fee. If you have certified your environmental account, we will charge you an annual certification fee. And if you're interested to learn more about these fees, I recommend you visit our fee schedule on our website. There are, of course, other costs associated with an environmental account, often the time and effort that goes into the design, and as well, time and effort that goes into data collection. And these costs are, of course, heavily influenced depending on if you do the work yourself, if you're outsourcing it to someone, the scale of the environmental account, and the complexity of it. So if you need help to better understand these costs, we can work with you to understand the scope of your environmental account, which can then help you get quotes from service providers. We have professional networks of accredited experts and auditors. So accredited experts are professionals who work in the environmental field. Many times they might be subject experts. So we call all our subject experts asset experts, and that means they have specific applied scientific knowledge in a field relating to environmental accounting. So they might be a soil scientist, an ecologist, marine scientist, etc. So they have the experience in going out and collecting field data within their designated area of expertise. We also have general experts, and these are professionals who have more of a broad environmental background. So they might have environmental management backgrounds, they might have worked in the agricultural sector. And so those are listed as general experts. If you need particular expertise in implementing a method, such as a complex vegetation method, you would be looking to use one of our asset experts in vegetation to help with the field data implementation. And so for all our accredited experts, they have a tertiary qualification in a relevant field, as well as at least 3 years of work experience in that field. And we do have a database on our website where you can go in and see our different accredited experts if you ever need help with the design or the implementation of an environmental account. Our accredited auditors are the professional network of auditors who can perform that independent audit of an environmental account. Again, these are experienced auditor professionals. Most of them work currently with auditing things like carbon accounts, but they have also undertaken training in the Accounting for Nature framework to build capacity to understand environmental accounts and to be able to audit environmental accounts. Again, we have a directory for accredited auditors as well on our website if you're seeking to gain quotes from anyone or want to engage someone from an audit. And on our website, we also have the criteria on what's required to become an accredited expert or auditor in case you are considering joining either of these professional networks. We have an online training course in environmental accounting available through our website. This course is self-paced, and completing the whole course takes about 6 to 8 hours. It goes through the 5 steps in detail where you will get hands-on experiencing in calculating that econ data yourself. So it's really meant to build confidence in applying an Accounting for Nature accredited method. Now, if you are using an accredited expert to help design and build the environmental account, you don't need to undertake the full training course. However, we require that at least one person on the team has completed the full online training course before you register your environmental account. If you want to contact us, you can reach out at info@accountingfornature.org. We're also available on LinkedIn, X, and we have a YouTube channel where you can see previous webinar recordings. We do have webinar recordings on a lot of our different accredited methods. So if you're seeking more information about how to apply a particular method, head to our YouTube channel to see if there has been a webinar recording on the method you've selected. So thank you so much for joining the webinar today. If you do have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A, and I will get to answer them right now. Again, if there are any really complex questions, we might get back to you on email after the webinar. So we've got a great question as to if a boundary of an environmental account can be expanded over time if situation change, or if that would be a separate project. So you can change your boundary over time. So if you add areas to your property, or if you sell areas of your property, that could be one of the reasons why you might want to change it. The implication that will have is that if it's more than 5% of the overall environmental account area that changes, the econ you generate the next time you go to certify your environmental account won't be directly comparable to your previous econ. So you will have what we call a break in time series, meaning that you will still have your old econ data, but you won't have a line between them showing a trend, because you're comparing apples against pears, essentially, if you change the boundary significantly. And so the question is then followed on asking about shrinking a project. So in the example here, if a woodland bird project that develops plans to do a carbon project planting in an open flat and wanted to register that separately. So when you come to register an environmental account, you register the first asset account that you have planned. You can add on more asset accounts as you go if you want to expand the different environmental assets that are encompassed in your environmental account. If you are shrinking your environmental account, you may be able to maintain time series by recalculating the econ for the new area. So in that sense, it's easier to reduce the size of an asset account compared to expanding the size of an asset account, as you're more likely to be able to generate an econ for the smaller part of the project boundary. We've got another question relating to barriers to maintain an environmental account. In general, maintaining a certified environmental account is really straightforward, in that all you need is to submit that annual certification compliance report outlining any impacts you've had to the environmental account area and the condition of those environmental assets. And you need to pay the annual fee to maintain a certified environmental account. When you do come to the 5-year mark, you will need to go out and reassess the condition. So you would do that by applying the method again, calculating that econ again, and producing a new technical report that you would then need to get certified. There are a couple of reasons for why you might need to do this more frequently than every 5 years. And one of the key ones is either if you want to make more up-to-date claims about the condition of the environmental asset, or if you're seeking to access any market space, so an environmental market space that requires you to have an audit at the time of issuance of credit. So you might need or want to do audits more frequently to be able to issue and sell credits more frequently. Thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. Again, if you have any questions, please contact us at info@accountingfornature.org. We would love to connect with you, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.